Hi everyone, Sweat-Themed Shirt Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Arca album. It's self-titled London via Caracas. Producer and singer-songwriter Arca is back with the third full-length commercial album. Highly anticipated, at least for me, because I thought that this new record over here would bring a big change in sound and style. Arca's music has always intrigued me, but hasn't really been able to hold my attention, keep my attention. I've never been floored by an Arca album, even though there are some really special and amazing things about Arca's music. For one, the sound. The way he treats sound on his two previous records is fantastic. His approach to sound craft is incredibly creative. It's so vivid. It's so textured. The auditory world he creates with his music is incredible. It sounds like his ideas come from another dimension or something, but when it comes to progression or structuring a track, Arca's songs leave a lot to be desired. A lot of tracks on Zen and a lot of tracks on Mutant just kind of feel like disconnected, avant-garde auditory vignettes that don't really do all that well when it comes to reinforcing one another. Sure, on an Arca album there's tons of awesome musical and auditory ideas, but when it comes to, again, building a track, there's just something kind of missing. Now that kind of seems to be changing on this new album over here a little bit, and that change comes at the hand of the incorporation of vocals on this album. Yes, now Arca is singing over his own instrumentals on this record, and it's done almost entirely in this really eerie, nasal falsetto that haunts my nightmares, along with the visuals in the music videos that have been released in promotion of this album. But if the vocals do anything on this record, it's that they give the experimental production on this album a stronger sense of direction, in my opinion. The singing on this album also brings out a variety of interesting influences that I hadn't thought of before with Arca's previous records. For one, Bjork. Bjork is most definitely an influence on Arca, not all that surprising to hear, given that Arca has produced for Bjork's previous record, or her latest record, at least as of now, Volnicura. He's also done production for FKA Twigs, and lo and behold, there are some elements, in my opinion, of kind of alternative contemporary R&B on this thing. I also think there are some ideas on this album for those fans of moody trip-hop music, maybe a Portishead fan, or people who are into really whimsical, strange, experimental Baroque pop, maybe an Anthony and the Johnsons fan. Just kind of imagine a lot of that Baroque instrumentation, a lot of that classical, whimsical instrumentation being transformed into a more synthetic sound instead. And also there are moments on this album where I feel like I'm listening to some kind of strange digital avant-garde opera, especially on cuts like ANOCHE. The dissonance and the harshness of Arca's music is still here, but the vocals just add a totally different dynamic to that. It's a beautiful element, a human element. To a degree, I've always appreciated how alien Arca's music sounds, but you know, I'm kind of liking what this lonely, strange, very sad singing is bringing to a lot of these tracks. Now, I'm not saying the vocals on this thing sound great in the traditional sense. I most definitely don't think that, but I think for what this record is, I think for the context that's brought with the instrumentals, the vocals do work, they do serve a purpose. For example, I can't really imagine myself enjoying the breathy, moany singing on the track Fugaces in any other context other than that track, with all these heavenly, warped rushes of synthetic tones. And the operatic singing on the track Sin Rumbo is chilling, sending tingles down my spine as the vocals are singing over what sounds like I don't know, this attempt at making some kind of synthetic symphony or pit orchestra, but a lot of the synth tones kind of come together into this sort of smudgy, chaotic way. Now, unfortunately, I still have my reservations with Arca's music and this album. It is not a perfect record, and Arca's first foray into writing more structured tracks does not go off without a hitch. There's still a handful of tracks on here that I think go pretty stale pretty quickly, either because of a lack of progression or uninteresting progressions. There are a number of tracks on here that I think lack any semblance of a solid ending or any kind of finality. The track Sauntering, I love this song, or at least what it sounds like for the moments that it exists in, because the interesting and beautiful synth progression that brings us to this really weird and odd vocal passage toward the very end of the track, and then it just kind of cuts off almost immediately at about the 2-minute mark. There has to be, this is one of the most compelling moments on the entire record. How is there only 2 minutes of this? Especially when you're ending the song in a moment where it feels like, wow, it sounds like this is going somewhere else. Obviously, it's going to end. It's ending. The song Urchin is a somewhat odd instrumental, but it just kind of sounds like a cut that could have been on the last Arca album. I sort of feel the same way about the strange keyboard piece, Child, that finishes the entire album off. The mix on this track is particularly weird. All of these synth tones kind of layered on top of each other in such a way where there's just kind of this big rush, this push of sound whenever they pop up. It kind of sounds like Arca is almost just like smashing his hands down on his keyboard, but obviously it sounds like there's a melodic composition to this track, so he's not literally doing that, but just again, the sound, the mix of it is kind of strange to me. The song Whip is actually in a way another favorite of mine on this album, but again, amazing idea with literally sampling a whip, and it sounds so great. Like, the sound of the whip is so vivid and crisp and clear, and the way that the sound of this whip whipping is sort of chopped up and made to be really jittery, really sporadic, it's really overwhelming and strange, and I actually, again, think is one of the best ideas that this album has to offer, and yet it only lasts a minute. You would think that it would be almost necessary to extend this idea out into something just more fleshed out, given that it sounds unlike anything else on the album. The fact that it is so short only makes it feel like even more of a random, nonsensical detour. And you know, while I do appreciate and enjoy the inclusion of the singing on this album, not every vocal part on this record is perfect or amazing. On the track Reverie, the vocal effects that the singing on this track is smothered in kind of distracts away from the humanity, the rawness, the intimacy of the vocals that I enjoyed so much on nearly every other track here. Meanwhile, the track Cora is maybe a bit too raw, at least in the sense of there's a moment where the singing just kind of devolves into while a lot of the background instrumentation is just coming off really vague, not really sure where it thinks it's going. You know, I will give a shout out to Castration. Even though this is just another instrumental track, it's one of the best instrumental tracks that I've heard on any Arca album thus far. The rhythms are so hard and in your face and crispy and punchy. It's really one of the most aggressive songs that I've ever heard Arca put together. I mean, it's in a way a banger. It's so mean and sort of distorted and aggressive and kind of industrial flavored too. And I don't know, I mean, I feel like I've addressed the bulk of what this album has to offer. You know, again, while I enjoyed the inclusion of vocals on this album, I came away from this Arca record feeling like the same way I have with pretty much every Arca album thus far. I mean, the tracks don't really seem like they connect all that well, flow all that well from the beginning to the end of the album, don't reinforce each other all that well. A lot of tracks with abrupt endings, fantastic ideas, abandoned way too early. Other moments where ideas are extended to the point where they just grow stale and uninteresting due to a lack of significant progression. I mean, going into this, I thought, man, this could be Arca's best album, but in a way it's even more of a inconsistent record when compared with the two previous efforts. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm feeling a strong 5-2 light 6 on this one, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. I don't want you to cry. Just leave an angry comment in the comments if you're angry. That's all. Other videos next to my head I think you should check out. Subscribe to the channel. Official website too. Arca, self-titled, forever.